Hello, my name is Stephen Lynch. I'm part of the consulting team here at Advisory.Works, and I returned home to live in New Zealand in 2020 after spending 12 years in North America. When I was overseas, I used to manage a global consulting team, and I've personally worked with hundreds of companies in the USA, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, assisting them with things like strategic planning, business coaching, and management training. In today's webinar, if you've got any questions, please pop them in the Zoom chat. I've got my colleagues with me, Logan, the CEO of Advisory.Works, and Karina, the operations manager. They'll be there to answer your questions. And at the conclusion, Logan and Karina and I will stay on for 10 to 15 minutes to answer any other questions you may pop in the Zoom chat. Let's get started. As you can see, today's webinar is modern management, and it is a huge subject. So I've selected 3 topics where I see many managers struggling: how to set up metrics that your people can commit to, how to set up projects so that you can implement them effectively, and how to have courageous conversations about performance, and how to coach and support your people the right way. Now, in the last webinar, I talked about strategy. And Winston Churchill, he said, however beautiful the strategy, you should occasionally look at the results. And when it comes to results, if you want to hold people accountable for results, you need to get the team aligned first. You need to get their buy-in and commitment on what good performance looks like. And this slide is the overarching theme of this webinar. We need to get everyone aligned first. So let's start with metrics, also called key performance indicators, or KPIs. Now, research from the Harvard Business School shows that most companies do a poor job of identifying good performance metrics. Now, yes, they track financial results like sales revenue and profit margins, which, yes, these things are important. That's what we're aiming for at the end of the day. But results are the outcome of good performance. You can't manage results. What you can manage are the activity and effectiveness measures that drive results. That's where the most powerful metrics are found. And the point I want to make here is, if most of your measures have a currency sign in front of them, they're probably not good performance metrics. Now, yes, there are some exceptions, but the most powerful metrics are typically non-financial measures. So we use these 4 questions to figure out your metrics. First question, what are the functional areas of your business model? That's things like your marketing, sales, operations, customer service, IT, finance, HR. Okay, so what result or outcome do you want to achieve in each function? Then once we are clear on the outcome we want, what activities or actions drive these outcomes? And what effectiveness measures let us know how well these activities are being performed? Remember, results and outcomes are important, but you can't manage results. What you can manage are the activity and effectiveness measures that drive those results. So activity and effectiveness, they are your balancing metrics. So activity without effectiveness, that's just a waste of effort. Effectiveness without enough activity is not going to deliver the real results that you want. And once you figure out the right metrics to track, other research from Harvard found that when you make metric performance visible on a dashboard, it improves performance. And they call it radical transparency, and it's one of the keys to modern management. Now, radical transparency, that's where everyone in the company can see which parts of the business are working well and which parts are not working so well. And they can see which people are performing well and which people are struggling and who needs coaching and support. And using dashboards to create radical transparency, it's not a new concept. I wrote about this in my book, Business Execution for Results. And I wrote that one of the most challenging tasks for Navy pilots is landing on an aircraft carrier. And so what the Navy does is every landing is scored for safety and technique. And the scores are posted where everyone can see them on what the Navy calls a greenie board. Now, a green score, that means a good, safe landing. A yellow score means you can do better, but a red score, that's an unsafe landing, and your boss is going to speak with you and coach you to improve your technique. And any Navy pilot will tell you no one wants to have red scores next to their name, and no one wants to have the lowest score on the team either. Now, there are 3 important principles here that drive performance. 1, you need to know what your score is. 2, your performance must be visible to your colleagues. And 3, there must be consequences for poor performance. Now, a dashboard can help you to be a more effective manager, but it won't manage your people for you because you need to give people feedback. There must be consequences for poor performance. And by consequences, I mean the manager's going to speak with you and coach you whenever you get a red score. Now, I'm not saying you should use dashboards as a stick to beat people with. That's certainly not the point at all. It's about shining a spotlight on performance so you as a manager can see where you need to focus your time. You can see which people need praise and acknowledgement and which people need coaching and support. But just like a car dashboard, anytime we see something colored red on the dashboard, we need to stop and sort it out straight away. And this is where I see many organizations come unstuck. And I was one of the founders of a company that made software dashboards when I lived in the USA. And I've looked at thousands of company dashboards, and I found that most managers tend to set metric goals too high. They set these aggressive stretch targets thinking that it's going to motivate their people. But in practice, it tends to have the opposite effect. And I get why you might want to do this. You think, well, if we aim for the stars, even if we miss, we'll still reach the moon. But I am going to say to you, beware. Because here's what it can feel like for your people. If you're good people, not the slackers, I'm talking about your good people. If your good people can't achieve the green level of performance by doing an honest week's work, they quickly become discouraged and demotivated. And if you use software dashboards and your good people have lots of goals colored red, they feel like failures. And they can become apathetic. They start thinking, well, what's the use? They start thinking that being in the red is normal. They start to ignore red scores. They stop paying attention to performance and they stop looking at the dashboards. So here's the thing. I learned this big lesson from looking at thousands of dashboards. Shame is not a motivator. A dashboard full of goals that are colored red will not motivate your people. So shame is not a motivator. And it is a balancing act. You've just got to apply just the right amount of pressure if you want to get fully motivated, engaged, and productive employees. So we need to set our performance standards carefully. Now, I like the red, yellow, green of the traffic light because everyone understands the traffic light concept. Now, some people prefer to have just a red and a green light, and that's fine also. But here's my battle-tested recommendations for how to set your thresholds. So red scores are unacceptable. Red, it's the level of performance where, just like a car dashboard, we need to stop and sort it out straight away. We need to discuss this with the goal owner. Yellow, that's the narrow threshold in between the green and red scores. We can keep the lights on, we can keep our jobs, but we're not happy yet. We're going to keep a close eye on things to make sure that everything's okay. Now, green, that is the target level of performance that you expect to be achieved most of the time. And here's my rule of thumb. If you've got a good person, not a slacker, a good person who's a good fit for the role, and they've got the right tools, training, and support, and they're doing an honest week's work, you expect them to hit that green level of performance most of the time. By that, I mean 90% of the time, 9 weeks out of 10. So to summarize, a good person, not a slacker, a good person doing a good job should achieve that green score 90% of the time. Single point accountability, or one throat to choke. It's a horrible term, but that's what makes it memorable. One person needs to own it. Now, many people can be responsible for doing the work, but one person is accountable for making sure the green level of performance is achieved for each metric. Now, here's an example of the sort of decisions that you need to make. You capture 3 to 5 metrics that measure the health and drive the performance of each function in your business. And I've used a hypothetical sales team here on the screen as an example. And this team came up with these 4 metrics. First one, weekly sales revenue. That's the result or the outcome they are looking to achieve in this function. Number of appointments booked. That's an activity measure. Number of sales presentations delivered. That's another activity measure. And the conversion rate, which is an effectiveness measure. Now, these are the totals for this function. Jenny, she's the sales manager. She's accountable for the team totals. And we can break these down into metrics for the individual sales reps as well. But you do the same thing for every function in your business: marketing, operations, customer service, IT, finance, HR. People ask me, how big should the gap be between the green and the red thresholds? Well, For financial outcome metrics, the red threshold's typically around 90 to 95% of the green threshold in my experience. Or for activity and effectiveness metrics, the red threshold's typically about 80 to 90% of the green threshold. But there's no hard and fast rule here. It's up to you and your team to debate and agree what the correct tolerances are and where poor performance warrants a coaching discussion. But remember, you need to get your team aligned first. You need to get their buy-in and commitment on what good performance looks like. Now, there are hundreds of things you can probably measure in your various software platforms, but when it comes to your high-level management dashboard, you need to focus. So less is more. Just focus on the key drivers of each function and choose 3 to 5 metrics per functional area. But beware, because there is potential for negative side effects if your metrics are not well thought out. I call it the dark side of metrics. So for every metric you come up with, think about the potential negative consequences of someone doing whatever it takes to achieve that target. And so what we do is we put each metric through my sniff test and we ask these 2 questions. First question, if we focus on this metric, what behavior is this going to drive in my people? And here's the interesting one. Is there a potential dark side to this behavior if it were taken to an extreme? What do I mean by dark side? Well, I've got some real world examples where bank managers in the USA, they would make risky home mortgage loans to people with bad credit ratings just to meet their target for mortgage loans. Or bank managers from the Wells Fargo Bank in the USA, they would fraudulently create extra bank accounts for customers just to meet their target for account fees. And I was personally a victim of this fraud when I lived in the USA. And I don't mean to pick on bank managers either. School teachers who were incentivized on what percentage of their students passed the exams, they just taught their students what was going to be in the test. Car mechanics, they overcharge customers for car repairs or charge customers for unnecessary repairs just to meet their hourly targets for revenue. Or we've seen customer service staff bribe their customers to give them a high Net Promoter Score or plead with their customers to give them a high NPS score. So use the sniff test. For every metric or measure you come up with, ask yourself, what behaviors could this metric drive? And is there a dark side if it were taken to an extreme? And I recommend you agree on a set of rules to provide clarity and consistency for your people. Now, these are just my rules. You need to negotiate your own set of rules that fit your culture and your values when it comes to metrics. You and your team need to agree on what the green level of performance is. That's the level of performance that it's expected every day, every week, every month. And you and your team need to agree on what the red level of performance is, the level that will be challenged and confronted. So remember, get your team aligned first, get everyone's buy-in and commitment on what good performance looks like. Because our aim here is to provide clear expectations up front so there are no surprises and no excuses. I've also got rules for keeping dashboards current. Now, you might think everyone should update their own scores on a dashboard, but I've looked at thousands of company dashboards and I'll tell you that you're deluding yourself if you think that's going to happen. And I've come to the same conclusion that Jeff Bezos did. And at Amazon.com, they nominate one person on the finance team and they make that person accountable to keep the management dashboards accurate. Now, yes, the goal owners are accountable for the scores, but the data champion is accountable for keeping the metric dashboard updated. And whether they manually update the data or automate the updating of the data, we don't care how they do it, as long as the dashboard is telling the truth every Monday morning. Now, managers ask me, should we pay incentives when people hit their individual metric targets? And my answer is this. 100 years ago, workers shoveling pig iron in a foundry, they worked harder when they were paid by the bucket. But most of us aren't paid by how much pig iron we shovel these days. Most of us have to use our brains and we have to collaborate with other people to be successful. And Jack Welch, the former CEO of General Electric, he said, achieving your individual metrics, that's just a ticket to the game. It's called doing your job. individual metrics should not be incentivized. And whatever you might think of Jack's approach to capitalism, the research firmly agrees with Jack on this one. And I appreciate that this might challenge some of your beliefs, because there is a compensation industry that exists to perpetuate the myth that individual incentives work. But the research strongly suggests they don't. Now, don't get me wrong, money is important, but money is a hygiene factor. A hygiene factor can satisfy you, but it won't motivate you. Now, if we are not getting paid a fair market rate for our role, yes, we get demotivated. But once we are paid what we believe is fair, studies show that adding more money does not increase employee motivation or performance. So think of a manager as being like the coach of a sports team. You only win when your team wins, and your goal is for the team to win the game, not to pay out individual incentives to some players while the team loses the game. The success of the team is what matters. The success of the team matters more than how any individual performs. Remember, we want people aligned and pulling in the same direction. So choose incentives that encourage teamwork. For example, you could pay a company bonus if you reach a certain profitability target or liquidity target or customer retention target. And the bonus could be apportioned out based on people's salary. Now, these are just some examples, but the key is to choose incentives that are self-funding and choose incentives that get everyone working together toward a common goal. Now, in the last webinar, I talked about strategic projects, also known as big rocks. The big rocks we're going to push forward in the short term to improve our company and move our company in the direction of our long-term strategy. They're the top 3 projects that we're going to implement right here, right now, in the short term. And Jim Collins, the author of the best-selling management books, Good to Great, Built to Last, he said, if you've got more than 3 priorities, you don't have any priorities. So once again, we need to focus. Less is more when it comes to metrics. Less is more when it comes to projects as well. So we choose 3 strategic projects for our company. Not 4, not 5, just 3. And anything that doesn't make your top 3 means, no, we're not going to work on that project at all right now. You see, strategic decision making, it's all about trade-offs and focus. You focus on the 3 most important things and you say no to everything else. And remember, single point accountability, and that horrible term, one throat to choke. One person needs to own it and take personal accountability to make sure that each project gets done. So we use the RACI model, RACI, to provide role clarity for each strategic project. You create a chart like this and you fill in the blanks. And the most important decision is who is accountable. And there can only be one name in that box. Remember, if you want to be able to hold people accountable for results, you need to get the team aligned first. You need to get their buy-in and commitment on what good performance looks like, because the aim is to provide clear expectations so there are no surprises and no excuses. So once you've assigned roles using the RACI model, you need to scope your projects properly to get everyone aligned on what good performance looks like. So you get together with your project team and you list out all the big tasks, the big things that are in scope to be completed before the project due date. But you also need to list out all the tasks that are out of scope, the project elements that will not be implemented in this planning cycle. And I can almost bet your first cut of the project scope will be too optimistic. It's called the planning fallacy. We all tend to underestimate how much time it takes us to complete our projects, and we overestimate what we can get done. Now, things never go exactly as planned. I mean, let's face it, shit happens. So we need to get everyone aligned and set ourselves up to succeed right from the outset. So to scope our projects more accurately, we conduct a pre-mortem. You get your project team together and you imagine that you have time traveled 3 months into the future and the project is behind schedule. There were delays and distractions and interruptions and people took time off sick and everything took longer than expected and everything that could go wrong did go wrong. And what we do is we ask everyone to sit by themselves and write out all the risk factors that might delay or disrupt this project. And then we bring people back together and ask them to read aloud what they wrote without any criticism or judgment. And then we collate all of these risk factors on a whiteboard and work together as a team to create plans to mitigate them. And once you've done this, you go back and review your project scope. Now, if you're like most clients I work with, typically you end up dialing back the scope at this point to make it more achievable. And this pre-mortem exercise, it makes it safe for the team to consider all the risk factors and obstacles, and it will help us to scope our projects more accurately and create more robust implementation plans. Remember, we want to get everyone aligned at the beginning and set ourselves up to succeed right from the outset. And once each project is underway, the key to successful business execution is for your project team to meet every week and discuss the status of each project. And you get your project team to write down their answers to these 7 questions in their meeting notes and share these notes with the leadership team afterward to keep them informed of progress. The great scene in the movie City Slickers where the old cowboy holds up one finger and he says, the secret to life is just one thing. You need to figure out what the one thing is and just do the one thing. So regardless of how many tasks you might scope out for each project, chunk it down and make sure the one thing, the critical path, is agreed upon each week, and follow up next week to make sure that the one thing got done. Now, this is not micromanaging. You give people the freedom and autonomy to figure out the best way to do the work, but the manager must follow up and hold people accountable for getting the one thing done each week. Once again, I recommend you set some ground rules to provide clarity and consistency for your people. Now, these are just my rules. You need to negotiate your own set of rules that fit your culture and your values when it comes to projects and tasks. Remember, we want to get the team aligned first. We want to get their buy-in and commitment on what good performance looks like. We provide clear expectations up front so there are no surprises and no excuses. Now, I've got a saying: successful business execution, 20% getting clear about what needs to be done, and 80% following up to make sure it actually gets done. And if you want to get it done, you need to have A players in every role. A players are your top performers. So let's have a look at this green square on the top right. The A player, these are the people who consistently deliver the agreed results in their role and consistently demonstrate your core values behaviors. So to be considered an A player, you must deliver results and behaviors. And these are the people we want to praise and recognize. We want to incentivize them to stay with things like employee stock options or profit sharing, as well as personal growth and career opportunities. Now let's take a look at the orange square at the top left. This is the toxic A player. This person delivers results, but they do not live your core values. Now this person is toxic to your culture. Now, sure, they achieve their numbers, but they are undermining your culture. And unless you can coach them to change their behaviors within an agreed time frame, and I recommend 3 months maximum, they should be removed from your team. And this is one of the sniff tests to see whether your core values really are core. Are you willing to fire someone if they can't demonstrate these behaviors? If you are not prepared to take a stand, they're just words on a wall. They're not core values. Take a look at the yellow square at the bottom right. This is the B player. Now this person demonstrates your core values behaviors, but they do not deliver the agreed results. Their metrics or their KPIs are below target. Their work is often late or below the required standard. And yes, this person is nice to work with, but they are holding you and holding your team back. Unless you can coach them to achieve the agreed results for their role within an agreed time frame, and once again I recommend 3 months maximum, they too should be removed from your team. And take a look at the red quadrant at the bottom left. This is the C player. You've made a hiring mistake here. This is your fault. You owe it to the team and you owe it to the person to free up their future as soon as possible. And you want to help them to leave with dignity, help them move to another company where they are a better fit. And this is your mistake, so be kind and be generous. As a manager, your job is to have A players in every role, people who consistently deliver the agreed results in their role and consistently demonstrate your core values behaviors. Another lesson I learned, don't assume that just because you make performance visible on a software dashboard, that your people know how well they are doing or how much you appreciate them. Most managers, they do not praise their people often enough. And I made this rookie mistake early in my management career. I would leave my good performers alone, and I spent most of my time trying to coach and fix the poor performers on my team. And the result was that the good performers didn't get much of my attention, and they didn't feel appreciated. Now, yes, of course, I appreciated them, but unfortunately, I didn't praise them frequently enough or spend enough time with them to show that I really cared. And it was only after a number of staff left to pursue careers elsewhere that I learned the error of my ways. And in terms of frequency, Gallup research suggests that managers need to find a genuine reason to praise your people at least once every 7 days. That is if you want your people to be motivated, engaged, and productive. And I learned how to praise people the right way from this book, Mindset by Carol Dweck. And the CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, he's made this book mandatory reading for all his managers because he wants all staff to keep learning and try new things and not be scared of failing. He wants his people to have a learn-it-all mindset, not a know-it-all mindset. And that all starts with how to praise people the right way. And research published in Carol's book, Mindset, found that there is a right way and a wrong way to praise people. Now, if we praise people's ability, they can develop a fixed mindset, which can discourage learning and make people scared of failure. It's better to praise the effort that led to the outcome. Don't just praise their effort. That's a mistake many people make. The outcome is important, so you praise the effort that led to the outcome. And that can help people to develop a growth mindset, which encourages learning and helps people to be more resilient to failure. And this is the best way to praise and coach your children as well. So if you want to be a better manager or a better parent, start by getting better at how you praise people. Now I want you to think about the best manager or the best teacher or the best coach that you have had in your life. A person in your life who coached you to grow and improve. So imagine that person now, whether they are a manager, a teacher, a coach. Chances are this person held you accountable. They challenged you when your results or your behaviors fell below the standard you were capable of. Sometimes you did not like what they had to say either. They were a little bit tough on you, but they cared about your growth and development, and they changed your life for the better. You see, being a good manager, it's not just about giving praise. Being a good manager means holding people accountable and challenging people on their performance. And if you aren't comfortable with challenging people, then you should not be managing people. Radical Candor, the book by Kim Scott. Now, Kim worked for Apple and Google, and she studied the most effective managers at these companies. And she found the best managers gave a lot of corrective feedback. She calls it radical candor, which is the upper right-hand quadrant here. And these good managers, they challenge people directly about their results, about their behaviors, and they care about their people's personal growth. Now, caring personally doesn't mean you care about hurting people's feelings. Kim says you need to be willing to piss people off. And yes, she uses those exact words. Good managers are willing to piss people off. You do this because you care about performance and you care about the person living up to their potential. So good managers, they practice radical candor. You challenge people when the results or their behaviors are not good enough. But unfortunately, most managers are in the top left quadrant. Ruinous empathy. And Kim calls this beat around the bush management. You want people to like you. You're scared to hurt people's feelings. So you chicken out from challenging people on their results or behaviors. But here's the thing, if you are not willing to challenge people, you are failing as a manager. You need to get used to the fact that people are not always going to like what you have to say. And you will hurt their feelings sometimes. But if you do it right, they will respect you for upholding the performance standards that you already made sure everyone was aligned on. and they will respect you for being consistent with your praise and your criticism. The bottom left quadrant, manipulative insincerity. This is the toxic manager, passive-aggressive manager. You don't challenge people about their performance. You don't care about their personal development. You say nice things to their face while you stab people in the back. The bottom right quadrant, obnoxious aggression. It sounds negative, but this is probably where Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, and Jeff Bezos sit. And here's the paradox. Kim Scott says, if you can't be radically candid, your second best option is to be an obnoxious jerk. Yes, really, she says people will respect you more and perform better if you are an obnoxious jerk, whereas if you are an empathetic manager who is too scared to call people out, people will respect you less and perform less well. So in summary, good managers practice radical candor. You need to challenge people directly and you care about their personal growth. Now, I like this quote from Kevin Kelly. He's a technology author. He's the founder of Wired magazine. Now, it takes courage to have uncomfortable conversations, but you do this because you care. You care about performance and you care about people living up to their potential. So if you want a high-performing team with A players in every role, you need courage to challenge people whenever their results or their behaviors are below standard. The number one regret of business leaders. I learned this from Adam Bryant, who's been interviewing leaders every week since 2009 for the New York Times. And he asks all the leaders pretty much the same questions. And one of the patterns he identified is the number one regret of business leaders. Can you guess what the number one regret of business leaders is? They wish they had dealt with poor performance sooner. Now, Peter Drucker, the father of modern management, he said it well. He said, leaders owe it to the organization and their fellow workers not to tolerate non-performing people in important jobs. Now, personally, I think every job is important. So here's what I do. I call it weeding the garden. You need to weed the garden every week. When metrics are in the red or projects and tasks are overdue, it's like letting weeds grow in your garden. And weeds aren't going to remove themselves, but it's easier if you deal with it every week when they're still small and there aren't too many. Poor performance is not going to fix itself either, but it's easier if you deal with it every week. Now, some managers, they think putting metrics and projects on a dashboard is going to manage their business for them. Yes, it will help you to be a more effective manager, but no, it won't manage your people for you. You need to meet with the goal owners every week and give them feedback on their performance. And you praise good performance every week. And you weed the garden to root out poor performance every week. Now, there are more nuances than what I'm going to put on this screen, but to weed the garden, just remember my 3-question coaching sequence. So you point out to the metric that's in the red or the project or task that's overdue on the dashboard and you say, hey, I noticed this has fallen behind. And then you ask these 3 questions in a friendly, supportive manner. First question, what's happening here? Allow the person to respond. Now, there might be a valid reason for something not getting done. Let's make sure we understand what that reason is. The second question, okay, so what one thing can we do this week to improve this? You let them come up with solutions first, but work together to come up with at least one tangible action. And the third question, what support do you need? Make it clear that you're on their side and that your number one role as a manager is to coach and support your people. And you follow up next week to make sure the task got done and assess the impact on their performance. Now, this 3-question sequence needs to occur each and every week whenever performance is below standard. I said before, being a manager is like being the coach of a sports team. You only win when your team wins. And your job is to recruit and train and coach and support a team of winning players. And if someone on your team can't meet the standard, you either coach them to meet the standard, or you find them a new position on the field where they can meet the standard, or you owe it to the rest of the team to remove them from the field. And if you see behavior that is contrary to your core values, you take them aside and say, hey, I heard you say this today, or I saw this behavior today. And you ask these 3 questions in a friendly, supportive manner. Same question, what's happening here? allow the person to respond, and let's make sure we understand why they behaved that way. 2, state the core value that should apply in this situation. And 3, tell them what you want. Describe the preferred behavior that you want the person to demonstrate in the future so that they get aligned with your core values and the culture that you want to foster in your team. Now, if you only did one thing differently as a result of my talk today, it would be this. I've had the rare privilege of looking at thousands of high-performing teams. I learned that the best managers conduct weekly one-on-one meetings with each of their direct reports. Don't tell me you are too busy. As a manager, your number one job is to coach and support your people. And the weekly one-on-one meeting is the most powerful thing you can do as a manager. It's the most important use of your time every week. And this is the agenda I teach my clients to use. 30 minutes maximum. Once again, this is not micromanaging. You give people the freedom and autonomy to figure out the best way to do the work, but the manager must follow up and hold people accountable for getting the work done, for getting their one thing done each week. I guarantee if you have the discipline to use this agenda every week, you will become a better manager and your team will become more productive. And finally, take a look at this one-page summary. If you can say yes to all of the items at the top, highlighted in green, these are the keys to strategy execution. These are the keys to modern management. How would you rate your organization looking at each line item here? If you could do one thing in the coming month to improve strategy execution, what would that one thing be? If you could do one thing to improve the way you manage your people, what would that one thing be? Write it down. And what I'd like you to do, and what I'd like to invite you to do, is to write down or type down your one thing in the chat panel. What's the one thing you are going to do this month to improve the way you manage your business, to improve the way you manage your people in the coming month? Please share it in the chat panel with us. What's the one thing you are going to do? If you could pick one thing from these lists, what's the one thing you would pick to do? Okay. I'm going to thank you all very much for your time and attention today. And Logan and Karina and I are going to stay on to answer any questions you might have or might post in the chat panel. But you would have seen reference to a real strategy in that list before. I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Logan Wedgwood, the CEO of Advisory.Works, to talk about a couple of things you can do right now to help you to create a real strategy that you can execute.